Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Denise Wetzel. I'm a STEM research and learning librarian, and I am a librarian for the College of Engineering. And I'm going to be teaching today about how to use Adobe Illustrator. And today is very much like an introduction. I have not used Adobe Illustrator before, um, style workshop. That being said, I'm going to share my video because I will be sharing it the entire time. So you should be able to see my screen here now. And we do have a bunch of workshops coming up, and next week is Adobe Illustrator and how to make graphs. So there's 9 different graph styles that are available that you can use to visualize data within Adobe Illustrator. And so next week is all about how to make these graphs, and that's the same time and place. And there's a registration link on the workshops, and Emily will add it to the chat. And if you have any questions, Emily is here. She is a great person if you need like me to slow down or just to kind of get something clarified. Also, we have a workshop that's part of our Data at Your Desk series that does a lot of different data tools. And for this series, we have creating scientific graphics. And so that is not in terms of creating graphs, but more creating like images that you would see if you were reading a scientific paper of some sort, or even like a kind of magazine style. And so when we get into that one, there's also a lot of content that has to do with color choice and things like that. That one's an hour-and-a-half workshop, and it's more in depth. So it's assuming that you've gone through this workshop or has a basic understanding of how to use Adobe Illustrator. So I just want to be super clear on the fact that this is an introduction. This is kind of getting you to understand a little bit more about Adobe Illustrator, especially if it's your first time. And you can find all of these workshops if you're on the library's page. There's a workshops tab, and you can find all of them. You can either scroll or you can choose a series like the College of Engineering. But anyway, welcome everyone. I am going to show you how to even get to Adobe Illustrator. There's 2 different ways. It kind of depends on what your status is. And by status, I mean if you are a faculty staff member or if you are a student. So I'm going to turn off my screen, and that's just because if I don't have my video on, I sometimes do a little bit better when it comes to things like having enough bandwidth to share my screen. So that helps out. So if you are a student, you would use something called the My FSU VLab. And literally, if you just Google FSU VLab, you can get here to the VLab. Now, there was an update over the break between the fall and the spring semester. So if you use this before now, then you might have issues where it says that you can't actually log in. If you have never used it before, you probably won't have the issues. And what ITS recommends actually is just to clear your cache. I've had to do that several times now, pretty much every time I go to sign in. So like right before this workshop, I cleared my cache again. And so if I go and sign in, and it might give me the entire login issue, and I have to remember my password. But okay, and so you should go right into it. If you get to an error message, clear your cookies, clear your cache. They specifically say cache, but I just clear everything, including my history, and it gets me in. When you get into this VLab, and it is available also to faculty and staff, but specifically this is for students, what you'll see is you have a bunch of different apps. So everything from like Adobe Illustrator, Adobe Photoshop, We are doing a workshop on Photoshop, InDesign, things like that. And you'll also see things like R, Studio, and SAS, and MATLAB. So things that you'll probably need at some point. And if you use something and you like it a lot, I mean, if I really wanted, I could, highlight the calculator. And so when I come in, everything that I use, and so these are the ones that I use the most, will end up being on my favorites, so I don't have to go and look for it. And then all I do is click on Adobe Illustrator, and it will open up in the workspace. It is the C6 version of Adobe Illustrator, which is a few versions back, but everything that we're going to cover is on Adobe Illustrator CS6 or in the most recent Creative Cloud. Things just might be in different spots. And so as long as you kind of know that and you're okay with looking around, you'll do fine. So this is my CS6 version of Adobe Illustrator. If you are a faculty or staff member, you can actually go to the service catalog if you haven't done this before, and desktop and mobile computing, and you'll see that there are, like, under productivity is Adobe Creative Cloud. And so all you have to do is download this and you can install it. So I have it actually installed here on my desktop, and that's super important because I use this quite often. So I have it here, but you can have it anywhere you would need. So again, these are the ones that you'll see me using the most, but we're going to open Adobe Illustrator from here. As long as you continue to work for the institute, like for FSU, it'll like be really easy to open these things. I know I need them to be updated. I'm very bad at updating. You should not see my phone, but I'm going to go ahead and open up Illustrator on here. And so today I'm going to be working mostly in my Creative Cloud version just because it is the most updated and it is the one I'm the most familiar with. That being said, everything I show you, you'll see the same thing and can find it on here for the CS6 version. So when I come here to Illustrator, what I'm going to do is I want to start a new project. If I don't have any projects, I would have my latest ones sitting in here, but I can go to create new. And what you'll see is the option to have things like a letter size object or a poster. I can do things for like mobile, so they'll actually give you phone sizes. It's only going up to my iPhone X, the 10, and your Surface, so they're not quite all the way, you don't have iPhone 12 yet, but you still have sizes and they're probably super similar. You have presets for different web files, you have video presets, you have print. If you're doing anything in art and illustration, you're going to have these different sizes. But I a lot of times just do custom because I can make it match the size of what I want to do. So when I'm going and I'm going to create a new artboard. So what you work in is called an artboard. And what I have here is I can create a title for it. I'm just going to leave it as untitled for right now. And then I'm going to choose my size. So right now it's on pixels. I have the choice of, I could say picas or inches if I know, like, what inch size. So maybe I would want it to be in like 8.5 by 11, which is going to be like that letter size, right? Which is pretty close to what it was. I can choose the orientation, how many artboards I want to make. I can choose things like, am I going to do RGB or cyan, magenta, yellow, or black? The biggest difference is it going to be online or is it going to be print? If it's going to be more of something that's printed, a lot of times we're going to use RGBs or our Pantone colors. If it's going to be something online, a lot of times we use the cyan, magenta, yellow, black. So I'm going to do that. And otherwise, it should create my artboard. I'm just going to click on create, and it's going to make the artboard for me. and it should look something like this. If I was on this CS6 version, I'm just going to say new, and you can do the same type of thing. So I can choose points, picas, inches, pixels. There's a few less options, but again, I can just do my inches. So 8.5 by 11. I can go to my advanced. I'm already in that cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And I'm going to say I want the one artboard, and I'll click on OK, and it'll create it in there. So right now in both spaces, I have the same thing. So we have our artboard here. Over here is our toolbar, and we'll go through some of these so you can kind of get to know them. And then over on the right-hand side are our preferences. And so these actually change. I have mine on Essentials Classic. Yours might default to Essentials, and it's just kind of the way it's set up. Essentials Classic is more of the style you would see whenever I'm using like the CS6 version. If you notice, it kind of looks pretty similar. It's just a little bit wider. I could make this skinnier, and then you'd only see that part. This actually can float. It can go anywhere you want, so it's not stuck right here. I could keep it over on this side, but I have been using Adobe products for over 10 years at this point, so I'm used to this layout because I have, a history of using this type of layout. So it's really easy for me. But you'll notice as I click on the different tools, sometimes what we have available over on this side will actually change, especially if I was to do things like stroke, and if I'm on a pen tool, it's not going to change right now, but these will actually change out. If you ever need some of the ones that aren't listed of these different windows or preferences, you can actually come on here and I could add in things like my layers and have it open up that way. Or I can have like a magic wand, and I can actually just snap it in so it's part of everything else, or I can pull it out if I don't want to have that one anymore. So you see I was playing around and I've added a whole bunch of things. You can kind of make this as tall or as short as you want it to be. And it's just kind of one of those things, it's a preference, but it's kind of interesting to know. So whenever we're working with Adobe Illustrator, it's a vector graphics software, which means it's used a lot of times to create things like web graphics and logos and icons, and even things like book covers and billboards get created with it. And it's pretty easy once you get over the learning curve. And so that's why it's really good to do something like this, because you can kind of play around. So we created a basic artboard here. And what's really important is to know things like our shortcut keys. Shortcuts keys are like hotkeys, and that's what makes it work really, really quickly. So over on my left, you'll see that I have all these tools at my disposal. The first one is selection tool, and you'll notice in parentheses it has a letter V. So V is my shortcut key in order to get to my selection tool, and that's going to be the one you use the most. It's basically clicking on something, selecting something. It's what you're going to need to use. You also have direct selection, and then that's shortcut key is A. So we have all of these different shortcuts. You'll see there's a magic wand. Anytime there's like a little down arrow, if I right click on it, it tells me that I can actually open up this toolbar to get access to even more. Or if I don't want it there, again, I can click on it and pull it out and pull it away. So, and I could place it over here if I wanted, or down here, or I can just close it. So you have all of these options embedded within, right? Pen tool is a drawing tool. I'm going to show you how to use this one, or I can right click on it and it helps you add different points when we're doing a pen. We have we're not going to do the curvature. We have our type tool. So this is actually putting text in, or it's the letter T and it shows it to you. We have, And Control Z, Control A, Control A is to select everything, Control C to copy, Control V to paste, and Control Z to delete something, just like in Word, works in here. This is how to make line segments. Line segments are how you're going to make arrows, things like that. Rectangle tool, this one you'll use a lot, and if I click on it, you'll see things like our rounded rectangle, our ellipse, our polygon, things like that. You can actually come in here and you can do the paintbrush. You're probably going to end up needing at some point the Control Z is undo, but like if I had just done it, delete it. But yes, it is undo, correct. Thank you. And then there is the eraser tool, which is Shift E, and that's kind of important. So if I had like drawn all of this, I could go over here and then, click on my eraser and then come in. But if I was in here and I was painting around, if I just do Shift E, I can just easily erase it, and it makes it a little faster. If I go out, it looks like I'm going off the artboard, but it doesn't really. Then you'll see that we have down here our gradient tool, which we'll actually get to over in here. And I want to make sure I have everything. Under our shaper tool, and I'll show you the shaper tool, there is a pencil tool, which is freehand drawing. So that's kind of the basics of this. So first off, I am going to click on I can either click on this on this selection tool, or I can click the letter V. And seriously, it's really easy. I like to use my shortcuts. It makes it fast. Big things to know is if I want to move my canvas around, I can't just click and move it, right? But if I press down on my space bar, it makes a little hand, and now I can move this artboard around this way. If I want to zoom in, is Control plus, and zoom out is Control minus. So I can make it as big or as small as I want. So first thing that I'm going to do is actually make a rectangle because I want to play with those. So that's my letter M, and all I'm going to do is just click down and drag, and it's going to make a rectangle, which is great. I made a rectangle. I could have made it this way, right? I could have made it that way. I do have guidelines on, which is on my view. I have smart guides. It helps me kind of line things up. If you don't have that turn on, you can always add those in. But I should tell you that I have that on. So I made a rectangle. And now if I want to move my rectangle around, I can grab onto it and I can move it. I also can come here into my corners. And so when I'm in a corner, you can actually make something maybe a little more circular, not have like the harsh edges. So what that is called is live corners. And so I can actually pull those in, and it pulls into a certain point. And then if I was to click off of it, now I have a rectangle, but it's like a rounded rectangle, right? I could be like, that was a little much. Maybe I didn't want to do it that way. And so my rounded rectangle corners now are actually here. It's that kind of like a mini bullseye. And so I'm going to put them back out just a little bit. But that's how I can go, and I can kind of make edges not quite as squared off if I need to on a rectangle. I can then also click on this rectangle. So say this is my rectangle. I'm gonna wanna add color because right now there's nothing, right? It's got a black outline, but it doesn't have much. So what I can do is I can click on this color, and there's like a color guide, and I can add things in. I can also click on swatches. I really like to use swatches. If you don't see swatches, you can always come to that window and you'll see swatches here. And so these are kind of like presets. So I could click on one of these two things. So this is fill. Right now there is no fill, so it has this red bar across. If I clicked on white, so it had a white fill, and then you see how this one kind of looks like an outline of a box? That's my outline, so I know I have a black outline. But I could click on that, and now it looks the same, But if I drag it, you'll notice that off the page, you have that white fill, so you can actually see it. So here's my box, and what I can do is I can add in like any color I want, something like that. I can come down here and there's libraries that are a lot of times installed. If they're not, you can add them in. Or you can say, oh, well, none of these colors are exactly. I can click on this little plus and that adds in more swatches for me. And I can come here and I can be like, all right, I want to add in a color and I'm using cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And so I could put in, you know, specific numbers, or I can play around. Maybe I want this more of like a maroony color. I can add it to my library. I say, okay. And so now that color is here and available to me. And so I've added that color in and it's right here. And I'm just going to close all that. So now I have, you know, a different color in there, and you'll see that it's also going to keep this going. If I was playing with this, I could as well change the outline. So if you just click on one of these, if they're not showing up over here, you can actually see it over here on my toolbar. And you can always do the whole click, and whichever one is in front. So right now the outline is in front, it tells you what the outline is. So I can make a white outline. I could make it a yellow outline. I'm going to make it a white outline. And so now when I pull it off to the side, it doesn't show anything, you know, it doesn't look like there's an outline on my artboard, but off to the side, you can see there's actually a white outline to it. Also, because I'm playing around with this outline, I can click on stroke. And so right now the weight of my stroke, which is that outline, is 1 point like size. But if I make it bigger, I can actually make my stroke bigger and it takes up more space. And again, it doesn't look like anything on here, but when I pull it out off of the artboard, you can see that. So that's one shape you could make. Now, if I want it to make more of like an ellipse, like a circle, I can do my ellipse tool, which is off of the rectangle tool. And I'm going to right click on the rectangle tool and you have the letter L, or you can click on it. And now I could make an ellipse. So I made the ellipse. Now it's going to take what I had just used. So it's kind of that maroon color with a super bold outline. Not a fan of that for this ellipse. Maybe I want my ellipse to be a little less, a little less. So first off, I am going to play with the stroke on here and bring my stroke down in size. And then what I'm going to do is go back up to my swatches and I'm going to say for my stroke outside, I want that to be the same color. I'm going to say no color. So there's no basically fill on the stroke. So it doesn't have anything. And I'm going to say I want that for this actual ellipse to be like a brown. We'll go with a tan color. If I like that, I could do Control C to copy it and Control V will paste it. And this is one of the reasons why I have these smart guide grid lines on here, because it helps me line things up, right? Like if I put something over here, if I don't have them on, I'm like, that looks about right. And then I can start looking at it and go, well, it's not exactly lined up. So I'm kind of looking for the center and trying to have more of a lined up look to this. So that's kind of like a way to make these appear like they're, you know, they're kind of overlapping, but because there's no stroke on the outside, so there's no outline, they kind of appear as one thing. And what I can do is if I like this, and I like this shape for some reason, I can actually go to my Pathfinder, which you might find up here in your windows. And what this does is it actually unite, like I can do unite. And so now these two shapes that I just created have become one shape. So if I was building something, say I want it to make it smaller, I have this shape and there's a contrast, but I'm not having to move two ellipses basically and hopefully line them up here. And then if I moved them over here, it creates that one shape. So it's one way to kind of transform what you're looking at. I can also, actually, let's do a line. So line segments are over here. It's not L, right? So ellipse was L. So we can't do a line segment as L. So it's actually that backslash key. So I can do a line segment and I could just make a line segment this way. And so when I do that, great, I made a line segment. If I go to my color, you can't really see it. So I am going to click on the black so that way it has a color. So if I click out of here, you can see this. If I had it on nothing where it had no fill, you wouldn't be able to see it. But what's really important about making line segments, and one of the reasons why we use them a lot of the times, is when we're going to be making different types of lines and we're trying to kind of share, that line or share an image, things like that. A lot of times we're going to have arrowheads or kind of different ends for them, right? So I can increase the weight of said line. Ooh, where'd my line go? I can make it a dash line, but I don't want to make it a dash line. So I'm going to go here to my stroke again. Oh, I'm going to make sure that's black also. So, but I can go on here and I'm going to make it a little skinnier, but I'm going to add an arrow onto this, which might mean like it's showing movement or something, it's pointing something out. But when I'm on stroke on here, you'll notice that it says I have a bunch of different options. So caps, these are the ends, right? So do I want it to have like a rounded cap? And actually, I'm going to super exaggerate this so you can see what I'm talking about. So right now, when I talk about my line, it just goes from point A to point B. It just ends. It kind of looks like a rectangle. Or I could give it rounded ends. So that way it's kind of, a little more visually pleasing. Also, what you can do is have a projecting cap. And what the biggest difference between the first one and this one is that you see it actually goes out past where the line ends on both sides. So you have that. And the same thing that we just kind of did is if you were to make this into a like box per se, say I had a box that I was doing. And I was just going to join things, you could do that, but we're not doing that part right now. Anyway, so this is my line. I'm going to move my line so I can see it a little better. So the other thing that I'm going to do on my line is I can add in arrows. So that way you can kind of see, if you're doing something from point A to point B. And so you'll see that there's two different ends, right? So I could have my arrow pointing this way, which is very, very long. I can have my arrowhead that way. I'm going to go back here. I can have my arrowhead pointing like this. We have a very wide, this is where I need to bring the size down. Makes it a little easier to see. So we have it going this way because I'm looking at this end of the arrow. So whatever would be considered the left side of the arrow, you're going to be using this type of arrowhead. Or you can make it the other end of an arrow, right? Sometimes this is like the starting point, and then on this side, the right side of my arrow is where I'm pointing to. And again, this is super exaggerated. A lot of times when we make arrows, they're going to be much smaller. but you can see that I can change then that type of arrow or the way it's looking. And it is something, you can have pointers even. This is something that is really important on how you use these. When I do the scientific figures, I'm going to talk about the importance of arrows and what arrowheads can show, but this is kind of a, again, intro. You can also make this line into a dashed line. So say I want it, dashes along the line. A lot of times we think of dashed lines as cut lines, right? So the way that we do a dash line can be a little different, but you can actually specify how large the dashes are, how large the gaps are. I could say I want a 1 point gap, which you can't even see that. I could say a 5, which would be a little bit bigger, but you have all these tools to manipulate, right? So we can make an arrow, but you can make this arrow actually show something, share something, and it's there. You can add in text. So text is over here on the left-hand side. Again, I have all these options once I add in text, but I can do the letter T for text, pretty easy. And if I have text, or I can type it in. If you don't and you first draw out like a text box, Illustrator's nice. It adds in the lorem ipsum dolor sit. So your standard Latin, this is a placeholder. And so you have that available to you. You can actually play around with the color of that text box. Up here at the top, I would probably actually go up to my window and I would go to my type. And I can actually then, again, grab this, pull it over with its friends, but I can choose my type style. It gives me, different types. If you're doing anything that's related to a university or a company, things like that, a lot of times they have standards for what they want you to use along with both colors, but also type fonts and styles. But you have all these options when it comes to playing around. What's really nice is, so if I had this original text box, I can make it bigger. But if I made it smaller, you're going to get this little red plus sign. I know it doesn't look like a plus, but it is, I promise you. And that's just saying, hey, there's more text, you can't see it. And it's like Illustrator's way of letting you know. So I could click on that. You'll see that I have a text box that's now kind of attached, and I can see how they kind of attach together, and it's like, oh, you still didn't do enough. Okay. But because they're all linked, if I was to make one bigger, you'll see that it actually will delete like from a box. So it's kind of nice. And then those don't actually show up. It's just whenever you're looking at your text, so you know which box goes with which. And that's really important if you're, doing different figures or doing something and you need to show different areas. Okay, so I've kind of avoided this, but we have the pen and pencil tool. And the reason is these are super important to like learn how to use. But I will say that this is one of the things that take the most, like the longest amount of time. Before I go to those, does anyone have questions about anything so far? I don't see any questions, so I'm going to keep going. All right, so the pen tool, it is over here on the left-hand side. It is also the letter P. If I pull it out or right-click on it, it's going to give me some options again. But I'm going to click on my pen tool. And so when I use the pen tool, it's a way to kind of make lines and make curves and things like that and have a little more control. So what I can do is I can click on one spot and I can click on another spot. I could actually, if I'm here, if I do that, it's going to, close it off for me, right? So if I go all the way back to my first spot, it closes it off and it ends it. You'll notice that my pen tool has a little asterisk to the side of it at the bottom. And what that means is it's in the freeform path mode, which means I can go in any direction I want. That being said, if you notice I'm on one of these corners I made, like, actually I'm gonna go over here. So here, you'll notice now that that little asterisk sign, it kind of has like an up arrow, and that's so that way I can hold down my shift button and make a constrained line segment using either 0, 45, or 90-degree angles. So I could draw that out like this. I'm holding down my shift button and I'm holding down my mouse button and drawing out, and then I'm going to let go. But see, it's going to then help me make this curve from this angle. So I'm going to then click on my next point, and it's kind of making different curves for me as I'm drawing with my pen. And this is one of those things, it just takes practice to learn how to do it. Again, I'm going to draw out really far so I can come back, and it's kind of fun. And then I'm going to click, and now I have this shape to it, and then I'm going to click back up to my anchor point. That's fun, right? So I've done all of this, but you can still see there's some little dots, which are my anchor points available to me. And maybe I still want to shift this around. I don't really like the shape I've made. So you can press the letter A, which gets me my direct selection tool, or you can come up here to this, which is this direct selection tool. And what that does is my direct selection tool lets me click on any of these, and it's going to help me like pull things out. Oop, that one pulled out really far. I can pull in ends, things like that, because maybe I didn't really want it that way. Or on my pen tool, before I do that too much, I'm going to add in an anchor point. So that's like my plus symbol. And I'm going to say I'm going to add in a point here, and a point here, and a point here. And then I want my letter A. Again, this is why it makes it a little bit faster. But I have this, and if I click right onto one of these white boxes, now I get these handles. And I'm going to zoom in so I can show you this hopefully a little better. So so I clicked on an anchor box, like I'll click on this one. Click on this one. I'm trying to pick one that you can kind of see. I'll go back to this one. So you can see I get these handles, and what I can do is actually move them around, which will move my curve. So I can move that around, and then I can kind of move the curve that I've made. So maybe I want it to not be quite as, blunt, or I want it to have more of a curved feel to it. I could do the same thing over here and kind of move this curve in. So I've used the pen tool to like kind of make my image or my figure I was trying to draw, but now I'm in here and I'm actually trying to edit it. What I would recommend also is I'm doing it in a very dark color so you can see it, but as long as you don't do it in white if your artboard is white, or the no fill, you'll be able to kind of tell if you keep your lines. You'll be able to tell. I could give it a fun, come on. But you'll be able to tell a little bit more about what you're doing. So I can come on, and I just need to click on any of these anchors, and that gives me a chance to pull things in. All right, so the pen tool is super awesome. It's just something you have to play with. But I'm going to pull that down, but you're seeing like the shape that I had originally made, it's getting more and more different from when I started. But it kind of, if you're needing to make things like an amoeba or something like that, the pen tool is helpful. So that's one thing to look at. One more thing to look at is the shaper tool, which is under the pen tool. Oh, I'm sorry. Which is, that's my curvature tool. Here's my shaper tool. So your shaper tool is Shift N. And so what your shaper tool does is, say I need to add in a circle, but I didn't want to use, the ellipse. If I draw a shape that kind of resembles the shape I'm drawing, you can add in shapes, that help me make more of a rectangle than my version of a rectangle. So this is kind of a really fun thing. And then under the shaper tool, which is the letter N, is your pencil tool. The pencil tool is like the pen tool, but it actually gives you the most freehand drawing control. That being said, it's really good to use this if you have like a tablet of some sort, because you can use like a pen tool, because it has the same like usability as the pen itself. You see the little asterisk, so I can do freeform paths, but it will actually make your hand kind of cramp, after you've done a lot. But you could draw anything you want. You're not constrained, you're not making points. I could kind of do what I want here, and it's gonna create a path for me, right? Here's one. I can try and make all these different shapes. That being said, if I come over here and I'm going to double click on my pencil option. So I have it all the way up on smoothing because I do not profess to be the best artist. My stick figures look funny. I can put it back on accurate and say okay. And now I'm going to draw, like a funny shape. And you're going to see it's going to leave all those little bubbles and wiggles I've made. So one of the things is kind of figuring out, do you want it accurate? Do you want it smooth? And then just like you did with the pen tool, I can click my letter A, and then all these points, I can come in here and I can start moving things around, and I can start, using my handles to make different shapes. So again, you have, the world open to you for options when it comes to these. So that is those. I'm going to go out for a minute. I'm actually going to click on a bunch of these because I want to show you how to make one thing, right? I've kind of done an intro of different tools, and I want to take some of what I showed you and put it into action. So, or you can always use the selection tool and just highlight, click over everything and press delete and it'll go away. So a lot of times when we use our phones or like a tablet, or even for instance, this Creative Cloud, we see icons. So like earlier I was playing around, and this is kind of like an Instagram style, icon that you would see on your phone. And this is, a way that people make these that you see. So anytime you have an app and your phone or on your, computer, something like that, you can see how people make these using what we just went over. So the first thing I'm going to do is use my rectangle tool. So remember that's over here. And I'm going to make a rectangle. And depending how I make that rectangle, I want it to be pretty basic, right? But I am going to round in my corners like I had done before, kind of, because when I think about like an envelope, a lot of times envelopes have rounded in corners. So if I'm going to click on V, and you'll see right now that I have this, there's no fill to it. I do have a black border. Again, if I did have a fill or I had the wrong style border, I could come over here to my color or my swatches and, change that. After I make this basic shape, what I'm going to do is actually use my pen tool. So my hotkey or my shortcut, which is a P. And so I'm going to start here. I want to do a path to the center, and I'm going to do here. And see, because I have these guidelines, it's going to look pretty even to me, at least to me a little bit. So just like we did on our last thing, I could, go ahead and make my corner a little less cornery, we could say, but I'm going to leave it like that because I like envelopes that have like a pointy on the bottom for the flap. And then the other part of this envelope, we're going to use our line tool, so that backslash, or it's over here. And I'm just going to draw a line. Oop. So I'm going to draw a line. I'm going to click on my first point. Come on. And then I'm going to pull it down over here in this corner. And then I'm going to try to be pretty similar. And get them to be pretty similar. It's not perfect, but I've still kind of done this. So everything is black lines. We have kind of an envelope shape, right? And so what I want to do is actually kind of select everything, and then I'm going to do Control G, because that groups it all, and now it's one object that I'm going to move. I don't have a whole bunch of objects. I'm going to come over here to my stroke, and I'm going to actually make the stroke like a 16-point font, which sounds a lot, and I understand that, but there's a reason we're going to do it that way. So I'm going to make that stroke. I have this envelope here. I'm going to make another rectangle behind that. So my M key, and I'm just going to kind of make this rectangle that goes behind it. Now you'll see that it's keeping that same stroke. I don't need that same stroke, so I'm going to bring it back down to 1. And I also am going to pull in, not quite as far, but I'm going to pull in those corners. So now you'll see that I have this, and they look pretty even, but I want to make sure that they're kind of centered, you know? So I'm going to go to my align. Again, it's here for me, it's because I use it, but if it's not under your window, you're going to have align. And I'm going to do this one, which is horizontal align center. So it's going to basically align everything so that the envelope shape I've made is in the center. And it's really important to like kind of align things, especially if you're, you know, making a figure or whatnot, you'll find that aligning is super helpful. So I've now aligned that, and I've pulled in my corners, but I'm going to add in a gradient, which is like a color, but it's a little different. And I actually have gradient here. It's a choice under stroke. Again, if you don't see it, you can come over here and open up this window. And so right now I have no gradient. I want to do a linear gradient to start. So I'm going to come over here, and I can just click on that, and it's white to black. I can do orange to yellow, which is super bright, and I know that. But I'm going to actually change this orange color, and I can click on it, and I want it to be more of like a pinky color. I'll do super pink. And then this one, and I'm just double clicking on the circle, I want it to be more of a dark color, like a kind of like a violet. And so now this shows you the gradient that I have made. So you have a lot of yellow, quite a lot of orange, and then there's pretty far. But what I can do is actually move this down, and you'll notice that everything is kind of moving down as I do that. And so it's changing the gradient that I've created. Okay. I'm going to come back to this path for this stroke because it seems like it's down. Nope. Oh, I know what I need to do. I'm going to right click, and I am going to arrange and send to back, because now it's going to grab this. I'm going to pull my stroke up to 16 again. So if you can't see something, it's probably because it went to the back, or it went to the front, because you put something, you place something on top of another. I think it's like a piece of paper on top of another piece of paper. So you can always right click, and you can do your order. So I can do that way, and I've made kind of a linear gradient, which is fun. And what I might want to do actually to my gradient, I'm going to come back to that, is make it more of a radial gradient. And so to do that, I'm going to edit this radial because it's like everything's centered. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this angle at 49.2 and this at 81.2. And that's going to change it. And now I'm going to edit and I'm going to pull this out so it's bigger. And I don't want this here. I'm actually going to pull this down. And I can play around, right, with the angle that I have going on. So it's kind of fun. You can play, you can change, you can say, whoa, that's a lot of pink. Don't want that much pink. But you can play around with the angles you have going on. If I didn't want something, I can always grab it, move it around, see if I like something better. You'll notice that I have a different angle kind of going on because there's all these different points. But I can play around with it this way. And it kind of changes everything. So I did that and I kind of have a different shape going on. You can play. I can come back to my stroke. I'm going to go to swatch and I'm going to say, actually, I want my outline to be white. I want this outline to be white. And now I've made basically an icon that you would see on your phone or on your computer or your iPad. And all I would do is if I like this and wanted to share it and use it, I could export as, or I could export for screens. I'm going to do export as. And it'll save it. And so here's one like I played around and made earlier. It will save it as a JPEG. You can save it as a PNG, a TIFF, anything that you would need. And then I'll just save it to where I can use it. And then I like to have the best quality, especially if you're going to be using this. But now I have this available and then I can share it and it's going to be a really great quality item that you've made. And that used a lot of what we went over. And it's pretty simple, but I would recommend trying to do something like that. And so we're at 12:54. I know I've talked for a long time, but I wanted to ask if anyone had any questions. Okay. Doesn't seem like it. Well, again, I want to remind you that we have some other workshops that are coming up that are more in depth. Again, next week, we're going to do graph making in Illustrator. And so if you want to learn how to make scatter plots and line graphs and things like that, that's a really great workshop that's coming up next week. And it's same time, basically the same place, it's on Zoom. And then if you want to learn how to make scientific figures and we play around, and that one's about an hour and a half, but it's a lot more in depth. That one will be coming up in the not too distant future. That one is on March 16th. So about a month from now. But I recommend trying, seeing what you can find. If you have any questions, this actually has my email on here, so you can always email me. Otherwise, thank you for coming and I hope you have a wonderful day.